Well, I think it's time. First of all, I wanted to ask if anybody knows why I have a picture of Michelangelo's Moses up on the screen.
Because that's what he saw on the block of marble he was
Yeah.
working.
Yeah. And how does that apply to what we're studying?
We have a big block called the Bible in front of us that we have to chip away.
Yeah. Yeah. He talks about all the 8 strands of prophecy and basically how we need to chip away what is no longer relevant for us today, just as Michelangelo chipped away to come up with David and Moses and Pieta and etc. So I thought I'd start with that. Okay. So by way of review, I'm gonna have to put the 3 of you on the spot.
No.
So what are the 8 strands that we've talked about over the course of this class?
One's prophecy.
Okay. Prophecy. Yeah. He labels it Judean prophecy. Morning, Bob.
Good morning.
So we've got Judean prophecy. What other strands are there?
Ryan can answer that.
Pardon? Oh, Ryan has the answers.
Well, what other strands are there?
Yeah.
There's the priestly strand.
Okay.
There's the apocalyptic strand. There's the I blanked.
What's the Harry Potter strand?
Oh, magic.
Yeah, magic. And the first one, tribal faith, where they had tribal gods, individual, gods for each tribe. And Ryan did real well. He hit most of them there. International wisdom, which was basically moral and common sense teachings. And Egyptian monotheism.
Oh, yeah.
The author says that the Egyptians were the first to believe in one God, even before the Jews. We mentioned Judean classical prophecy and the priestliness, both ministerial and militant. Can anybody tell me what the difference is between the two?
Well, one was more concerned with the rules,
Mm-hmm.
and one was more concerned with the people and going in a different direction
Right.
sometimes.
Right. And he says that the conservative ones were trying to literally conserve tradition, and that they were the more conservative and the more militant. And then we go on to Mesopotamian magic, including divination and seers and miracle workers. And the last one is the salvation theology, which was aimed not so much at how we consider salvation, but rather as deliverance from captivity for the Jews and some future glory that the prophets talked about. And whoops, sorry, I forgot. Persian apocalyptic, which is where Dempsey claims we get the concept of angels, fallen angels, Satan, the dualism in the world where there's there's a battle between good and evil, and a new age in the future, new age to come. Comments on those? That's by way of review, because this is kind of a summation chapter talking about where we stand today. And then the next chapter, he'll take and go through some specific examples and challenge us to say which of these strains or strands are represented by that particular biblical event.
Well, I had forgotten about the international wisdom learning.
Mhm.
How far back does that go?
That was one of the earlier ones.
Yeah.
He claims that was very much earlier. So, but it's still, I think in all of these, he's saying that the strains continue on today. We have some of that in our faith even today. Obviously, the moral and the common sense teaching is, makes sense. Okay, let's see. So he says that some people say that we live in a post-Christian era. Has anybody heard that?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Well, Christianity is not the dominant culture anymore.
Okay. He literally lists 3 different reasons why he claims we're in a post, or people claim that we're in a post-Christian. And they include, he says, high schoolers can explain the creation better than the Bible.
Probably not.
You agree with that?
I have no idea.
Well, we always call on the people who come in last to answer the questions. So,
Talking about scientifically,
talking about post-Christian era, and
scientific explanation, I guess.
yeah,
For
Yeah.
creation.
Yeah. Okay.
We have a better cosmology, or we have a scientific cosmology.
Okay. And what's the difference between the two?
Science versus. That's what I was gonna say, magic.
Well,
Or-
what's the difference between the scientific and the biblical stories of creation?
Magic, I think.
Okay. But even more foundational than that, or not even foundational. How long did it take God to create the earth, according to the Bible?
6 days.
Okay, and he rested on the 7th,
So,
right? What does science say about creation?
Not done yet.
Yeah, it's ongoing. We're in an expanding universe.
So far, it's 13.8 billion.
Yeah, that's more than I can count, I'm afraid. So
You'll start counting now.
I still won't get to it that high. Okay, he says that the people who claim that we live in a post-Christian era indicate that parents can teach a useful code of ethics better than the 10 Commandments.
well, I can see that because the 10 Commandments basically tell you what not to do,
Okay,
whereas your parents should teach you what you should do instead.
okay. Any other agreement or disagreement with that?
I mean, it's good not to kill, but it's better to be kind and
Right.
generous than.
Right. Morality is not confined to simply not stealing, not killing, not envying, etc.
You were gonna say? Or you were thinking?
The second point, I think is a little more tenuous, especially today, but yeah, the 10 Commandments are certainly not comprehensive morality.
It'd be good if some people learned them though.
Yeah, well, that's true too. That's very true.
And abide is by.
Yeah. And so the third reason he says is astronauts went to the moon way beyond where heaven is supposed to be. So the biblical.
I never knew heaven was that close. I guess I just thought it was.
No, I don't really thought those.
Yeah.
spheres were in the ancient
Yeah.
world.
Well, I think that there was the concept that there was the heaven above and
Yeah,
hell below and the earth in between,
Mhm.
and that there was a canopy,
Yeah.
and that was all there was.
Oh, and we have idioms that show that ancient belief, you know, and hymns. The phrase that comes to mind is the music of the spheres,
Yeah,
Yeah,
you know. Well, we don't think of it as
yeah,
a crystalline spirit that's
Right.
covering the earth.
well, and as technology changed,
Mhm.
they could see further. I mean,
Yeah,
how far did Galileo see?
well, further than the church wanted him to.
Yeah.
yeah,
But he
that's
saw further than
true.
the moon.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you saw a planet.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And now we've got, well, I guess the Hubble's gone. What's the new one?
It's still there.
Well, how
We have
about
the web.
we have the
The
web.
web.
yeah,
So it's showing new pictures of further than what
Right.
we saw before that.
yeah. Every once in a while, you'll see a post on Facebook comparing the Webb and the Hubble
Mhm.
and how they see the certain areas of the heavens of the universe, and it's quite a contrast. You know, how much additional depth there is.
Right.
Okay, so he talks about the destruction of old religious myths, and I think Dempsey. Well, I know Dempsey would say that we do not live in a post-Christian era, but there are issues that we have to be aware of. And he asked the question, are we worshiping a shadow of what had meaning for past generations? What does that mean?
Well, if we take the Bible literally,
Mhm.
then we believe the world was created, I mean, the universe was created in 6 days. We believe it's okay to stone people for their sins. I don't,
Yeah.
it's a more literal look.
Mhm.
You believe the earth is only so old because people have done their well, not scientific.
Well, they did the genealogy of the patriarchs and
Yeah.
basically came up with 4,004 years, I think it was, as the age of the earth. So,
I know there are Christians that believe that, but I don't think the majority do,
No, probably not.
at least. Starting the earth and creation and stuff.
okay.
I find that. I know there are people that defend that viewpoint, but I don't think it's. Surely it's a majority.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at a shadow of a shadow. I was looking at I looked it up the other day, and my mother's patriarchal blessing says she is of the tribe of Ephraim. Okay, is that true genealogically?
I doubt it.
Most likely not.
Okay, do we still believe in those 10 lost tribes and that we are somehow descended from those 10 lost tribes?
I think,
I don't. I
yeah,
mean, I think that there's an attempt to kind of explain some things that wasn't the answer.
Okay. Okay. I think he's simply trying to say to us, let's take a look at what we believe and be sure that it is relevant to our age, because we all have learned some things in growing up, and our parents have learned things, and our grandparents have, that maybe are no longer accurate religiously. And so he's saying, let's take a hard look at those. And is your faith?
There's
Sorry, go
a
ahead.
creator,
Mhm.
but you don't have to believe the story of Genesis.
Right.
You know, that was an attempt to explain where the world came from, that it was, to me, that is a myth.
Yeah.
Attempting to explain creation.
Mhm.
And you don't have to believe that to still believe that there's a creator.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Well, I don't want to tell stories out of school, but my mother worked in a blood lab, so she was familiar with science at a certain level, and she believed in the biblical account of creation. So this generation has moved away from that.
Right.
Okay, so he's simply saying, are we still worshiping and believing things that are not factually accurate because it's in the Bible? And 30 is the question, are Bible school stories the bedrock of our faith or instructional insights into the development of our faith?
My vote would be insight.
Others?
Those two things don't have to be exclusive, I mean, mutually exclusive, but is he saying, if it's the bedrock of your faith, is he saying that if it's proven that those stories didn't happen, that your faith would, you would be devastated by that?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what he's saying. Would your faith be destroyed,
Yeah.
devastated, if all the biblical stories are not 100% accurate?
And for some people, I think it would be very hard. I've never had a problem with that myself. If it's allegory,
Mhm.
it may still have wisdom to teach me.
Yeah.
If it didn't really happen. I mean, and a lot of things in the Bible are so ancient, it's
Mhm.
doubtful that all of them happen. And some of them were stories that get passed down and aren't quite accurate.
Right.
Been translated so many times.
Mhm.
How accurate is
Some of the details have got to be fuzzy.
Yeah.
At least that's my view.
I'll go back to saying it's what they knew at the time, and they didn't have microscopes or telescopes or in-depth knowledge of how the body worked. And so
Mhm.
a lot of theirs was based on myth that came from different cultures.
Mhm.
Do we have all knowledge at this point in time?
No,
1,000 years from now, people are gonna look at us and chuckle.
Yeah.
We still can't agree on how history informs us about our past. Even in recent times, we disagree about what the history is. We interpret it differently.
Mhm.
How can these poor people that, 700-800 years after something supposedly happens, and they don't have libraries and they don't have, solid historical records outside of maybe the Old Testament, how can they have stories that are more accurate than the stories we create out of the history that many of us have lived, and we see it differently?
Yeah.
well, and they had limited worldview. I mean, a lot of times they never traveled outside their tribe.
Well, and the Old Testament, my understanding is the Old Testament wasn't formulated until the 6th century AD.
Mhm.
So you're talking minimum of 6 centuries and more after
long
the
time.
events. Yeah, it's a long time. Okay, Dempsey claims the central message of our faith rests on 2 perceptions of God. Okay, this is your quick quiz, your spot quiz. What are the 2 concepts, the 2 perceptions?
I know one of them he mentions is that God is all loving.
Okay, God is all loving.
He's ethical.
He's ethical.
I didn't hear the second one.
Ethical.
Ethical.
Oh. And the workings of the universe are the workings of God.
Yep. He combines the 2, the loving and ethical, together. But he also says the workings of the universe are the workings of God. What does that mean? What does it mean to you?
Well, if he's the creator, then what goes on in the universe is part of that creation.
Okay.
He may not be pointing his finger and saying, okay, now it's your turn, but
Okay.
he sort of set the whole thing up and then it kind of rolls on its own, maybe. I don't know.
That would be called, that's referred to as a clockwork universe. You just wind the clock and just let
Maybe
it
it's a
run.
little more than that. But I don't see him necessarily pointing to each universe that gets created. I think he set some things up and then some things were sort of worked within its laws. I think.
Well, and if the universe is expanding and stars are dying and worlds are coming into being, and we believe that God is the creator of all things, doesn't that mean he's still active in the universe? Any other comments on those? The central message of our faith, he says, should rest on those two perceptions of God: that he's loving and ethical, and the workings of the universe are the workings of God.
I think it's important to understand that those are our perceptions.
Mhm.
You know, one of the things he keeps talking about is the anthropomorphizing of God, you know, giving humanity has always given God human characteristics
Yes.
because that helps us to understand. So whether God was warlike or God was angry or God was any of those things, you know, this is also an anthropomorphic view of God, that God is loving and ethical. Those are human constructs that we understand and that help us to get through life. And so we attribute that back to God who created us. And they're probably, of all the constructs that humans have believed about God, they're probably the two that would be the most useful in terms of our ability to get along with one another and to save our world. If, you know, if we act lovingly and we act ethically.
Well, I know, I thought, when he said, you know, central tenets of our faith, you know, I thought of Jesus saying, love God and love the neighbor.
Mhm.
And are the similar
Yeah.
thought. Those are
Yeah.
the key elements in what should guide you.
Do we have problems if we try to separate the human aspects of God from the real God?
Well, outside of understanding God in human terms, what do we have? We don't understand God.
Yeah.
You know, God has to be, you know, if you look at what we understand today about the universe and the sheer magnitude of all of creation, we don't have words to describe that.
Yeah.
We don't have capacity in our brain cells to understand that. It's, you know, again, I keep going back to Norman Bernauer, but he always said God is much bigger than, you know, what we think. How big is your God? That's the question you would ask.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have any comprehension of what God really is, but that's how we understand God to be.
Yeah.
Because it's useful to us and it's constructive and it's caring and loving and helpful.
I have
Okay.
trouble getting my arms around the workings of the universe, but when I put it in just creation and how our bodies can heal, and I just think the central message is God was really, really smart.
I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that one. Okay, he talks about the supernatural versus natural. In all ages, a fundamental theological dispute has been whether there is a separation between the workings of the natural universe and the workings of deity. In fact, sometimes deity.
Deity wrong every time in this check.
Say again?
Not every time, there's one time.
Oh, well, maybe there was one. Deity is spelled wrong almost every time in this chapter. I just
Yeah.
want to point that out. The English teacher wants you all to.
You sure it's not? It's probably
DEI.
Jonathan Bacon mistake.
Oh, in the book, it's spelled that way. And
Oh.
it's wrong.
So it's not deity.
Nope.
No, it's not deity.
I was wondering about that, Sharon. I saw that and I was like, have I been misspelling that word my whole life?
No, you have not.
But if you go by the rule, I before C, I
I
before
before
E,
E.
except after C and is in.
I found that whoever did the proofreading for this book missed a lot of things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I clearly went along with the author.
You followed the author. He
I
said-
disagree with some of his stuff, but on the spelling of deity, I guess I agree. So,
You trust this guy? He can't even spell deity.
yeah. Oh, in fact,
You'd be the lemming that follows the other lemming.
yes, I would be. My apologies for that.
They teach us all these
rules for the English language. And then all of a sudden we find out, well, half of the time that doesn't fit the rule.
There's always exceptions.
Well, back to the essence of this quote.
Before we lost control.
Yeah. It says, in fact, sometimes deity is called the supernatural to emphasize the I think it's supposed to be contrast.
Yeah.
Yes.
With the natural. Oh, well, you're all finding my lack of proofing skills. So,
This is why God gave us Grammarly and spell check.
yeah, you wouldn't believe it. One time I was an editor. So those days are long past, I guess.
You put DIETY in the Google and it comes out DEIT. I was gonna say sometimes that autocorrect doesn't work so
Yeah.
well either.
Yeah, that's true. What are they talking about here? The separation between supernatural and natural, and do you in fact believe that that exists?
No.
Supernatural means it goes beyond nature,
Mhm.
which it could appear that way because we only have limited knowledge.
Yeah.
I mean, what did they know about eclipses?
That's
Yeah.
natural.
Yes, but did they think it was natural?
Well, the thing that grabbed me about this is growing up in the RLDS church, my mother and preachers and others would constantly make the point that there is no separation between our spiritual lives and our everyday workaday lives. That there was not a division between what's natural and what's supernatural, that God is involved in all of it. So that, whether that was what the author meant, that's what came to mind when I read that quote.
I think a better term for what you described is sacred versus secular or profane,
Yes.
you know. And that's a little fuzzier. I think supernatural to me is God reaching outside of nature or breaking the laws of physics as we know it
Mhm.
to do miracles or to show, you know, that he can do what he wants. There's also this is a kind of a tangent, but there's also a term called preternatural that I've only heard talked about demonology, and this Catholic exorcist was talking about how Lucifer is not supernatural because he's not God, he's a created being. So he's part of nature too. But he's preternatural, which I forgot how he defined that. But it's kind of about the hierarchy of created beings. And I do think that God can be outside of nature because he created nature, outside of time. And when you get to thinking about what's outside of time, your head explodes.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to try to explain that.
Yeah. Any other comments on the quote?
Metaphysical might be another good term. I don't like supernatural personally because I think that everything in the universe is nature. So to say that something is supernatural means that it's outside the universe, and I don't know that I would agree that that exists. I think sacred's a good word that Ryan suggested, and maybe spiritual might be a good word to think in terms of God.
Okay.
Well, now we think we have a multiverse out there.
And
So,
time is simply another dimension. You know,
right,
we're fairly comfortable existing in, you know, 3 dimensions, but if you think about time and all of the theories that Einstein and others have developed, time is very much dimensional as well.
Mhm.
Like the burrito theory,
What's that?
the burrito theory or whatever.
The
it was.
burrito theory. The universe is a giant burrito.
Yeah, folds in on itself or something. So it says preternatural is often used to refer to some sort of mystical phenomenon, whereas supernatural is used to refer to otherworldly phenomenon.
The author talks about, does God work outside of history? So what does that mean, and do you agree with it?
I'm not sure what it means.
I would take the question to mean, does God work in a way that is not historical? Are we comfortable in thinking that God intervenes or has intervened in ways that we can't historically verify that happened?
Okay. He has some charts, which I know are not always the most enlightening, but he talks about the apocalyptic theology as basically God working outside of history. In other words, history goes along and God has to save us from ourselves. And so at some point in time, the Messiah comes, the righteous are taken away. There's 1,000 years of temptation, et cetera, but it's outside of history. It's not something that naturally occurs in the course of history, which goes in cycles, typically. And then he also talks about that the prophets assumed that God works within, he says in, but I say within history. What does that mean?
Well, I guess I think that God is trying to influence us to make our history better.
Okay.
But I don't think he's just gonna sweep in and wipe people off the face of the earth.
Okay.
I don't see that as being very loving.
Yeah. I think Dempsey is saying that the prophets worked within history because what they're trying to do is they're trying to change the people. God's not going to save us. God is the influence that leads the prophets to share with us moral and ethical issues, decisions, and all. But that basically the prophets are there to encourage us to be loving, ethical, caring, and not violent and destructive. So that's, I think, what he means by operating within history.
And that's opposed, well, we got on the side there, that's opposed to the prophets that operated magically or apocalyptically.
Yes, right.
What he considers to be the legitimate prophets were simply stating the obvious, which was historically verifiable. That
right.
The Assyrians are coming, the Babylonians are coming, it's, if you don't change, we're going to be carried off into captivity, and indeed it happened.
Right. And oftentimes it was a message that the people were not unified. I mean, they were following their own paths and making them therefore susceptible to being conquered and invaded and all that. He has a table or a listing, and he says the modern assumption that creation is a process billions of years long, not simply a week or a day. And he says that attacks the wisdom and the magic strands, biblical strands, and that male and female of the species develop simultaneously. That's the modern assumption. That's the scientific assumption. And the biblical strand says women were created from a rib taken from Adam.
That's one of the creation. There's two.
Yeah. Okay.
But yes.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the other one?
The male and female were made at the same time.
Okay. That's the second.
And it's interesting that both were they were both left in Genesis.
Yeah.
So
I guess some editor couldn't decide which one was right. So, also, the modern assumption is scientific understanding supports a God at the center, but not hosts of archangels, Satan, or demons. And that's the biblical strand that is attacked is the apocalyptic. And this makes sense so far. I mean, any questions on that? I can go back a slide if you had comments or questions. Okay, the modern assumption is that past end of time predictions have proven false. We confront problems, not an immediate end of time. And again, that is attacks the apocalyptic strand. And an ethical God would not order the killing of all natives in conquered lands. And that attacks the militant priestliness strand. And finally, temple sacrifice is not the way to cultivate a meaningful relationship with God, which attacks the militant
Thank you.
priestly. Yeah.
I mean,
Comments?
This is a good way to clarify
Mhm.
his points. I don't know if I agree with all of it, but it's a good clarification tool.
Okay. Well, as an example, for me, it's always been troubling in the Old Testament where God commands them to go into a land, Canaan or otherwise, and slaughter everybody.
Yeah.
And then those in some cases where the Jews commingle and marry, then they're supposed to be slaughtered along with their wives. You know, I mean, there are some pretty harsh things. And I think that an ethical God would not require that kind of human sacrifice or slaughter.
But in the, he pointed out, and I can't tell you which one of the prophets pointed it out, said, well, the same as God brought you out of Egypt into this land, he also brought, and he named different nations, I don't know, the Babylonians or the Assyrians, he brought them out too.
Right.
How do you reconcile that with him also said, and another place it says that kill those people?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
It
Exactly.
seems like you got two views being presented, and they don't really try to. They're both there.
Yeah.
It's not like we try to do. Well, how can that? You know, we're trying to reconcile again the same. How can you say that and say that? Well, there's a contradiction.
Well, and how much did we struggle with that years ago with the story of Laban and Nephi killing Laban?
Yeah.
And, you know, I can remember all my Sunday school teachers trying to justify why that had to happen.
Yeah.
And yet how it was inconsistent with what Jesus taught.
Right.
Well, you look at the Muslims, you know, and it gives you an idea of how that was, because you've got Muslims that are peaceful and loving and good people, and then you've got the fanatics that want to kill everybody that doesn't believe what they believe exactly. So, you know, that's kind of how they were back then too. You've got, you know, your run-of-the-mill ones, and then you've got your fanatical ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, the American Indians would say Christians do that too.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, just look at the Crusades, you know, that's what they did.
Against the Muslims.
But
yeah.
Well,
The Jews.
to be fair, the Crusades, there was bloodshed on both.
Oh,
ends
yeah.
of it.
oh yeah, sure.
But you do have to wonder, where is God in all of this? Or where is a just and loving God?
Sometimes in my mind, you know, things happen because God knows that if all of those people had lived, you know, the planet could not support them and their offsprings for generations. Just my opinion.
I had
yeah.
one person tell me, when I said, why does God let this happen? The response was, why do we let it happen?
I mean, a lot of it is choice that humans make to hate someone or have
Yeah.
power over another nation or another group, or, you know, and so they take these violent steps to protect themselves.
Well,
They think, but
Look at
it's
the war,
just wicked.
look at the warring factions within our political system, right? It's abhorrent.
Yeah.
Mhm. I think God is wondering sometimes, why did you let that happen? You shouldn't have to swoop in and take care of that. You know what you should be doing.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes some real activism to fight that kind of violence.
Mhm.
And sometimes we're just too comfortable in our own lives to worry about it.
That's probably the best argument for the clockmaker God that Ryan was talking about, that, you know, this is all us. God just kind of started the universe and then let it go on its own. And then that way you don't have to, you know, people who embrace that particular view of God that don't have to give explanations for why all of that stuff happens. We're causing it to happen.
Yeah. I'd like to think he's somewhat involved. I sort of like part of the clockmaker, but not completely. I don't think God just set it in motion and just said, have at it.
Well, you're always
Yeah.
got, you know, a lot of this comes back to the agency.
Yeah.
Well, personally, I've always felt that God is that good influence that we feel. And I think he is active in the world. I don't think he puts his finger on the scales, but he certainly shares his spirit with us. And we know what's right to do in many cases, and we choose not to do it. It's a little bit like Paul, who knew exactly what he knew what he shouldn't do, but he still did it. And we're kind of like that.
That's gonna be mentioned in my sermon today. Yeah, I know.
So
Ryan gets the last word today.
good. I'm looking forward to it.
Choices every day that may not be the way you choose to conduct yourself and respect other people or not. All those choices add up to the atmosphere and the places where you are.
Yeah. Exactly. Dempsey goes further and says that each of those attacks on the different kinds of strands of faith don't touch the prophetic. And this is why. He says the prophets. Now, I have to clarify here for dear Dempsey. In other places, he writes that prophets are not always prophets.
Right.
That sometimes they screw up. They misinterpret, or their own personal biases influence.
Yeah, you pointed out in Ezekiel.
Yeah.
Well, no.
So in a sense, when he describes this as the prophetic, he's talking about, in the best case scenarios, the classical prophets did not deal in speculations about creation. It says they fought against otherworldly mysticism. In other words, they were focusing on what helps people today. What are the moral and ethical issues that people need to be aware of today? He says they advanced sophisticated and loving ethics equal to modern ethics. And they contended against substituting sacrifice, ritual, and mechanical obedience to statutes as a substitute for ethical conduct. So in other words, the law doesn't rule what is ethical and moral. That's what rules. Any comments on that?
I don't know if I quite understand that last point, man.
There are times when they talked about doing away with some of the prophets didn't support temple sacrifices, as an example, and instead said what you need to be doing is loving your neighbor. And that ritual was not in and of itself something that was godly, but simply something that we use to approach God. So they're saying that what you need to do is substitute, rather than statutes like the Ten Commandments, substitute ethical conduct. I think that's what he's trying to convey.
Well, some scriptures say, you know, I don't care about your sacrifices and all these burnt offerings.
Yeah.
What I want is your heart.
Yeah.
First time I ever heard that was when whoever was our bishop at the time in Kansas City State came to preach, and he stood up to read his scripture reading, and all he said was, "I, the Lord, have no need for your bull now." And he sat down. And boy, did that get everybody's attention. And then he got up and read the rest of it, and he said, I, the Lord, have, this is from Isaiah or somewhere, I have no need for your bull or your lamb or your
Mhm.
dove or any of the things that you sacrifice. Because what I wanted, you know, what Dennis said, I want your heart. But he sure got our attention on that. I've never heard of that before, but it's always stayed with me.
Yeah, and I don't want to just be a gadfly here, but I don't, with the whole ethics thing, I think that's another form of law. You know, as we articulate what is ethical, what's not, and who gets to decide. Like, I personally think that abortion is wrong and evil, but there would be many people, you know, in this church that would disagree, and that's fine. But who gets to say what's right and wrong? You know, and is it just, you know, well, I have good intentions and you have good intentions, but how should we govern ourselves? So I don't know. It's something that I don't. I guess I can understand the thing about ritual can be empty, but yeah, the whole. I don't know. I just want to. I can't quite put it into words, but I'm not settled on any of this.
I can't remember which Jewish sage said this, but he was supposed to explain Judaism while standing on one leg, one foot, and basically he said it was basically the golden rule. Don't do to others what you wouldn't want done to you, and all the rest is commentary. I think it's Hillel, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of boils it down to.
I think it's good to keep in mind too for Ryan that ethics is also a human construct, and so the ethics don't always agree with each other. I took some courses in ethics when I was in college, and I learned a lot about ethics at the time that I would never have imagined. But I personally, you know, since you brought up the abortion thing, I personally don't think abortion is a great answer for birth control. I prefer that we didn't have abortion, but I'm also in favor of people having the rights to decide what to do with their body. So those are two ethics that in my mind are in conflict with one another. So the next step in dealing with that ethically is you then consider about how many people are being affected. And so the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few is one ethical decision point that we can come to.
So that would be utilitarianism is
the
greatest
I'm
good
just
for the
saying
greatest.
ethics is not perfect. It's not a perfect way to look at the universe either, and any more than philosophy is or science is or any of the things that we have at our disposal to try to make sense out of life. There's always going to be conflicts. There's going to be decisions that have to be made.
Okay.
On the last point there, I think the prophets and God don't want you participating in a ritual if it doesn't do anything to change your behavior or your life. You know, it needs to have meaning and make a change. I mean, I hope what we do on Sunday mornings in class and in worship service changes it somehow in the following week, in the following days, that it's affecting how we conduct our life or actions or whatever. Otherwise, why are we doing?
Well, and I think, you know, all of our behaviors at some point we have to ask, is what I'm about to say or what I'm about to do, is it loving, is it caring, is it nurturing, or is it destructive? And if it's something that I think is destructive, well, you know, we need to withhold that.
Right.
Probably. And if it's nurturing and helps us understand the world more deeply, then it's probably a good thing. Hard to know.
Well, and I would say like communion, if you're taking communion because you think you're supposed to, and it has no other meaning, then it's kind of a meaningless ritual, whereas it's supposed to help reconnect with the promises we made.
It's interesting, and I think it's in The Power of the Prophetic, Dempsey's other book, one of his other books. He talks about when he was baptized, and that he was expecting this great spiritual experience, and he came out dunked in water. I mean, but when he was confirmed, he really felt the presence of the Spirit, and for him that was meaningful. So sometimes we have to go through those rituals to see if in fact it speaks to us. Sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't. I've been to communion services where, okay, here's the bread, here's the wine. I've been to other ones where somehow it moved me to realize I'm part of a community of Christ.
We went yesterday to see the movie Cabrini.
Oh,
If you have not gone, you should.
it's on my list.
It's excellent, and it's about an Italian nun that she's opened up a little orphanage that she wants to go on bigger. She going through the Catholic Church, and they keep denying her requests. And finally, she ends up, they call her to the Vatican, and first time she's ever been there. And I don't know the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, but anyway, the guy, one of the guys just below the Pope told her, to stop, because she kept writing letters to him, writing letters. And finally he says, it's not going to happen, stop, Well, she happened to see the Pope, and she says, I want to talk to the Pope. And he says, no, that's not going to happen. And she says, well, then I'll keep writing letters. And so finally the Pope kind of heard about it, and he sat down with her. And at first he turned her down, but she wanted so badly, and her idea was she wanted to go to China to open orphanages. And he finally talked to her about it, and she told him that the world was not big enough for her. He says, do you think that you're big enough to do this? And she says, the world is not big enough for what I want to do. And he finally agreed to let her do her orphanage thing, but he sent her to America because of all the Italian orphans that were on the streets of New York and dying. And it's just a fascinating, fantastic movie. And she ends up opening hospitals and orphanages all over the world, and schools for nursing and different things. And she became a saint over all immigrants. But it's just a powerful, powerful movie. And she's going through past all this other stuff that's the rituals. One, I'm a woman, they don't want to do it because I'm a woman. Secondly, she had health issues, so it made her weak. And she was against, she just stood up in everybody's face and did it again, went past that. She went through her ethics, the ethics that they put upon her were not what they really should be. And she was determined she was going to do it. So it's only in the movie theaters for about 4 or 5 more days. So if you are interested, go see it. It's fantastic.
Okay, what does Dempsey mean? The only modern attacks that are uncomfortable to the prophetic strand are those that deny there could be a God who communes with people.
He's not an atheist
Yes, that's true.
and believes that God can give revelation.
I think he's also speaking to the fact that many deny that their God is still speaking to people today. And, a lot of them say it's just the prophets were back then and God's not going to change from what they said.
Other comments? Do,
There are people who don't, and I might be one of them, I don't know. Some Christians to me believe God is so personal that he's practically telling them whether to eat Cheerios or cornflakes for breakfast.
I had cornflakes this morning.
Okay. How serious? So I don't, I don't think God is involved in the minutia of living. Surely we're smart enough to take care of that. But I think he still cares. But I do believe that some people have over personalized his interference, I guess you might want to call it, in just your daily living.
well, here's a question. Does the community of Christ believe that God communes with people?
Yes.
That's
How?
Repeat the question.
Does the community of Christ believe that God communes with people?
No.
And how?
Well, I think it could be many ways. I mean, there's the still small voice that nudges you into a
Okay.
direction.
Okay,
And I see God as being an influence.
okay.
It's constantly encouraging you to do what you should do.
Nobody jumped up and said, we have the Doctrine and Covenants and a prophet.
I was gonna say, all of
That's a given, that's a given.
Yeah.
have expressed the mind and will of God at some point.
Isn't that God communing with people?
I think what people were thinking was more so on a day-to-day basis, or
Okay.
more of a week-to-week basis.
So I was,
Okay.
yeah,
Once in
gonna
a while,
say, start there and then work up the,
Okay,
and then say, in the bigger world of community of Christ. We
Well,
have a prophet.
yeah,
I mean, my wife believes that all cardinals are her dad talking to her, so the bird.
mhm.
So we had one out chirping outside of the window this morning, and I was like, are any
Cardinal birds.
Yeah. Some means Catholic cardinals.
Oh, I thought, boy, she's really in that power structure.
Even though those documents that get put into the Doctrine and Covenants come through the prophet, we still have a process of discernment in
Right.
the
Yeah.
church that allows the rank and file to have part of that process, that prophetic process, and
Yeah.
being emphasized more and more all the time in the world church, I think. So, not just the prophet is listening to God, but we're supposed to be listening as well.
thinking back to just coming to church, fairly regularly, when I was a youngster, even in my mid years, I think I felt like the Spirit was talking to me at times during church,
Mhm.
Bud Sheehy, whenever he would come by, I mean, I felt like that guy is like making a difference, in my religious experience, so to speak. So,
Harry Black was that one.
just
Yeah.
different people like that, so I would call it, something that's happening regularly, so,
Okay.
communing with us regularly.
Okay, so he's basically saying that the only real attack on the prophetic strand is if you don't believe God talks to people today. That's it, in essence. Do you agree that modern thinking reinforces the prophetic strand by supporting the practical, realistic, ethical approach to the prophets? This is a quote from Dempsey.
Is that all one sentence right there, or is that two sentences?
That's
The one
one
sentence.
sentence.
Do you agree that modern thinking is
Reinforced.
Well, the headline is the start of the sentence.
Yeah.
editing that for you?
Yeah, okay.
Good question.
Okay, I'll take that out.
Yeah, I think that is part of modern thinking. There's also, we're kind of in a postmodern age now, and that has a lot more of a tolerance for contradiction. but
That would be postmodern meaning social media.
I
I'm
was,
just throwing that out.
I'm scrambling to define it. It's really tricky. Shoot, you put me on the spot. But
Anyway, keep going with your thought.
it's almost like beyond, well, Nietzsche wrote Beyond Good and Evil, and we're kind of like, it's almost like a new religion. But not sure where I was going with that.
Contradictions or something.
Yeah.
Well, there's a postmodern, basically, some of the things, I don't know if I can define it, but some of the things that characterize it would be that, for one, different viewpoints give you different understandings, and there isn't one that's the correct understanding, and that they challenge authority. What else would be one? That they, they think there's been perspectives that have been ignored throughout history, with one dominating, and now they challenge that one dominant belief is correct from perspective, that other perspectives are valid. And I think that's part of it. And they're skeptical about authority.
I think that's the biggest thing. Skeptical of authority. And,
Narcissist.
Well, I'm gonna move us on to, says our God concepts are our metaphor for the inner workings of the world. So in other words, we view the workings of the world as God. God active in the world. And he goes on to say astronomy, geology, archaeology, history, and biology are books of God as surely as are the books of the Bible. And I guess we could have a long discussion about that.
That's a lot of stuff.
And Dempsey has written another book called something like The Other Books.
Yes, yeah,
I think we've been talking about those.
yeah.
I don't know.
Well, science reveals things to us about creation
Yeah.
and the
We're
this planet.
Well, and
Pretty
we
amazing.
accept. What is it? All good books. That's
yes,
why your book club is
Yep.
such named.
Yep.
Sorry.
I'm gonna whip through these last few slides just to complete. So basically, I was gonna ask you, should we accept every scientific discovery blindly
No,
in every passage in the Bible?
every scientific discovery is usually confirmed by other.
Yeah.
Other report.
Or
I don't want to interrupt, but I brought my family heirloom and they've already seen it, but I'll pass it around. Authentic Irish shillelagh,
Oh,
passed down from my great grandfather. They were Irish, and
look at the end of
when
it.
the English
Quite
took their
beautiful.
guns away, when they invaded Ireland, the Irish people used that as a self-defense weapon. And I think it's hickory. It's got a shamrock carved on the end of it. And
Okay, I'm going to summarize this real quick. He talks about the benefits of believing in a universal God. And the primary thing to me is that the universal God means that ethics are universal, that what applies to this community applies to all communities. Says the truth about God must be consistent. It says Bible times are not a special dispensation when God walked closer to humanity, that he's available to us today. And the basic nature of God is unchangeable. And I'm going to skip over another one. And he talks about the qualities that confirm. He says this is the way in which we evaluate the stories in the Bible and elsewhere. Is God loving? Is God universal? Is God ethical? And God calls people to build a more loving world. And the prophets talked about shalom being the central focus. Isaiah referred to the cause of Zion. Jesus called the kingdom of God. And again, we're out of time. So he talks about where the strands stand today, and we just won't deal with that. I think we've kind of covered a lot of this anyhow already, so I'm going to just alert you that next Sunday is a congregational meeting led by James. So there's no class next Sunday. It'll be, I don't know if it's in here or in the main sanctuary, but that will be next Sunday.
Is
And
that
we will-
like, is there like a meeting before the service? Is that what you're saying?
It's rather than class, there will be a congregational meeting. So,
Okay,
and I'm not sure if she's going to be talking about preaching, or if she's going to be talking about the recent sale of the artifacts and all, or she's going to be leading a discussion on one of those two, and I'm not sure which one, based on the feedback she received. So, okay. The following Sunday is Easter, and there's no class, but there is a get together, Easter egg hunt, etc. And the following Sunday we're going on to chapter 10 of this book. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry I
Thank
kept you a little late today.